Hello. Welcome to the Politics and Letters podcast. I am David Barfield with Jim Livingston. Our guest today is Stephen Bronner, Professor Stephen Bronner. Stephen received his doctorate from the University of California at Berkeley. He is currently the co-director of the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue. He is a Board of Governors Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Rutgers University. Participated in missions of civic diplomacy in Darfur, Guinea, Iran, Iraq, Palestine, and most recently, Ukraine, which we'll be talking about. He has authored and edited countless articles and 20 books, such as Peace Out of Reach, Moments of Decision, Socialism Unbound, and The Sovereign. He is the recipient of the 2011 ME Peace Prize from the Middle East Political Network, which is based in Jerusalem. With that, Stephen, welcome to the Politics and Letters podcast.
My pleasure.
Hey, Steve.
And special hi to my former colleague, Jim Livingston, whose reputation at Rutgers, I must say, was of the highest.
Oh, yeah? Wow.
Among students. Let's put it that way.
Okay, good. I was going to say, wow, I wish you'd have told my department that. Damn.
Yeah.
Well, the full disclosure here is that we all are Rutgers somethings, graduates and retirees of Rutgers University. Steve is an old teacher of mine and a friend. So to get that out and have everything above board, we can ask our questions. Steve will enlighten us. Anyway, Steve, you made an interesting remark to me in private that I will paraphrase. The left has a very hard time explaining events for which the U.S. is not responsible with respect to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And there are a lot of perspectives on this. There's one in particular that I kicking around the internet and reading things I've seen from ideologically disparate places. John Mearsheimer, Noam Chomsky, and Henry Kissinger, as examples, hold that NATO's reckless expansion, and I use the word reckless in quotes, forced Putin's hand. So I'm sure you're familiar with this argument. Assuming that the U.S. is a significant influence in NATO's behavior, and given the remark I referenced, I assume that you disagree with this, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And second, and a follow-up to that is, or sort of maybe address first, is it possible that, in reading your remark, is it possible that Putin really never cared about NATO's behavior, or?
Let's take the first question first. I think, although I have great respect for both John Mearsheimer and Noam Chomsky, there's a certain reflex when when a crisis appears, the immediate enemy becomes the United States, and I think that's a legacy of Vietnam. And very often it is the United States that's the principal enemy, but not this time. This time, I think it really is Russia, and it is Putin's decision to not only invade but basically obliterate the country. That decision was Putin's. It wasn't the United States. It's true, he responded to the provocation of the United States and its promise not to extend into Eastern Europe, a promise, by the way, which is based on roughly on a handshake, which I think it's ridiculous to think that a cynical realist would take seriously. It's true that breaking that promise was sort of poking the bear, but poking the bear doesn't justify the bear obliterating the person who was innocent of maybe that's the wrong way to say it. The Ukraine. That there's a disproportion in response to that provocation, especially since a deal could have been made originally with regard to, in principle anyway, allowing Ukraine to enter the European Union and avoid entering NATO. Now, what Putin has done is engage in a self-defeating policy, which has led Sweden and Finland to wish to join NATO precisely because it's scared of Russia. They're scared of Russian imperialism. And so I think that's sort of where we are on that. Yeah. What was your second question?
Is it possible that Putin's concern about NATO was overstated, or maybe even untrue? Like that prior to this, he uses it such an excuse that it wasn't a concern of his, but a tool.
I think that would be overstated. NATO was created as a response to the Soviet bloc after World War II, or the supposed ambitions of the Soviet bloc after World War II, and with the collapse of the Soviet Empire, it seemed to have lost its bearings in a certain way, and that's reflected in the academy by the complete dissolution of Soviet studies, which I'm sure Jim remembers was like a dominant area of the social sciences. Yeah. After the collapse, its members scurried to find something else to do. And today, put it to you this way, until the invasion, that discombobulation, that lack of purpose existed. I mean, and it was in response to Russian actions that it was reinvigorated by President Biden. Now it's a serious force once again, and in a certain way, that was less up to Biden than up to Putin, who completely miscalculated this entire enterprise. That's my.
Can I follow up on that question of NATO and its provocation by turning the question around, or turning the sequence that I think you very adroitly and correctly note, and that is that what you mean the United States isn't responsible for this mess, and that is, could the invasion be conceived as inevitable in view of Putin's seeming loyalty to the doctrines of philosophers like Alexander Dugin, who thinks in terms of a Eurasian landmass as the basis of a renewed empire, and Russia being the center of it. So in other words, without any poking the bear from NATO, was this in the works for at least a couple of decades? And Dugin didn't publish the big book until 2014, but that kind of thinking has been central too. I think that this resurrection of the idea of Mittel Europa, that what the European powers have to do to offset American power, and here we come back, I guess, to the causative significance of the United States, what they have to do to offset, or at least copy the American project, is to establish a continental groundwork for empire in the world. Is that, in other words, so absent NATO, is this invasion still on Putin's agenda? And even the obliterative quality of the warfare there.
It's interesting. What you say and the Duganov doctrine, in a certain way, it reflects the increasing fascism, totalitarianism of the regime. Middle Europa, of course, is a concept that's usually identified with Hitler.
Yeah.
And
but it does go back to the mid-19th century. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it goes back to the mid-19th century. That's true. But, it's usually identified with Hitler. And I think you could probably make a connection there. I think I'd do it a little differently. My old teacher, Henry Pachter, did a book years ago. He's dead now. On the history of Soviet foreign policy.
Yeah,
and it's only in German. It was never translated.
I guess I didn't read it then.
Yeah. But no suspicion there. He basically argued that from Peter the Great over Lenin to Brezhnev, Soviet foreign policy had the same aims. Mm-hmm. And the aims were warm water ports, a buffer against the West, and a certain defense against in the North. And I think it started out that way for Putin too. If you sort of chart the actions. Yeah. But I think it expanded into this imperialist undertaking that you're talking about through the logic of the war. And again, the increase in promises that accompanies the increase in the totalitarian character of the regime. We often forget that, of course, that the more totalitarian the state, the greater the promises of national glory and expansion. Yeah. And so I think in the end result, you're right. Yeah, I just would put the causes of it differently. In a certain way, that was again unleashed by the. If one really wants to be cynical. The war becomes an excuse for Putin's centralization of power, even more than he had. Yeah, I think you can see it that way. I'm not sure I buy it, but I think so.
Is that what you mean when you say it's a self-defeating program then?
Yeah, it seems to me that every aim that Putin had originally has, at least in the moment, been counteracted. This could change. I mean, obviously, just like we believed in the beginning, including me, mistakenly, that Ukraine didn't have a chance in a war with Russia, which was Kissinger's argument. I think now it would be a mistake to say, well, Russia has no possibility at all for a counteroffensive, especially given Iran's support in troops and weapons, and the Chinese support, which remains a bit questionable, but could increase at any point. Plus, and I think we leave this out, I actually did say that in an article, the nuclear threat. I don't think that would come out until about 6 months from now. Mm-hmm. Europe has to go through the winter with radically increased gas prices and inflation. The Times today even spoke about European discontent
Yeah.
about paying the price. And that might happen in the United States, but even if it doesn't happen, I think that Putin was probably waiting to see how the elections turn out. Because, of course, the Republicans are far closer to Putin through the machinations of Trump than the Democrats.
Right.
And if the Republicans win, and the Europeans get sick of this, all bets are off.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a frightening prospect, actually.
Yeah, well, especially since the Republicans look like they're going to do it. They're going to win both houses. So that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Is Congress House, right?
Right.
Yeah. And obviously, if they, at the best of expectations, they win the House and the Senate, everything gets frozen. I mean, it would be the worst case, an extreme extension of what happened to Obama.
Yeah.
So,
one of the things that I noticed in reading some of your articles is that you have a unique perspective, rather than as opposed to a lot of the folks who are opining on the situation, in that people who place blame squarely on Russia tend to avoid discussions of any kind of diplomatic solution or negotiation. And those who insist that the whole thing is a Western-led NATO setup are anywhere between negotiations and rooting for Russia. There's a wide array of perspectives. Yours is different because you're willing to acknowledge or you argue that it's not the U.S., but that you're willing to talk about negotiations. And I thought, to me, when I was thinking that, I thought, this is really the political scientist in you. Is that what brings that about? Or it does differ, but maybe it's not an answerable question, but how do you,
it does differ. I like to think it does differ. When I and Eric Goslin formed the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, we decided that what we wanted to do was speak to the needs of civil society beyond the state interest in any given conflict. That was how we began. And for this reason, in a certain way, this preoccupation with blame is irrelevant. Its impact actually on the conflict subsides as the conflict continues. It becomes a moral discussion, mostly for the influence makers and especially academics. Our concern was is, as I say, with what's the impact of the people, on the people. And obviously whether Zelensky and the Ukrainian state are winning or Russia is winning doesn't say much to the complete obliteration of Ukraine. And so what we did was align with some dissident elements in Ukraine, various NGOs and in the country or sent into exile from the country, and especially the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, which is a wonderful organization. And we connected with the director of its Ukrainian branch, Nina Potarska. And we sort of put together, with them and with the European Center for Democracy, sort of a declaration of where we stand on the conflict and what would be the preconditions or what would be the conditions for peace aims. We presented that, or I and Nina presented that at the OCE meetings in Warsaw, which just took place. Both we were invited, of course, through our organizations, not simply as individuals. But I represented ICDD, and Nina represented WIPF, the Women's Peace Organization. And we put it forward. It's now on their website, and I hope, and ours at ICDD. And the basic preconditions are neutralization of and non-nuclearization of Ukraine, the guarantee of security for both sides, and essentially a set of calls for dealing with the most basic concerns of rebuilding Ukraine, and issues that usually escape the left. Exchange of missing persons, retrieval of bodies on both sides, what you do with humanitarian corridors. These are, how should I put it? There's some very concrete things that one can begin with, even if one doesn't want to begin with the larger issues. For example, we did call for tabling the debate over Luhansk and
Donetsk.
Exactly, Donetsk, which is sort of embarrassing that I forgot this, since most of the people we are allied with come from those two areas. Anyway, that's how we that's how this thing developed. As for my own standpoint, I have sort of a schizophrenic development in this regard. My one set of teachers were pure realists.
Not that.
Yeah, Hans Morgenthau and Henry Actor and Richard Lowenthal. These were smart guys, I'll tell you.
I know. Reprehensible nonetheless, yes.
The second strain, I was also very interested in critical theory, and I studied with Ernst Bloch, who isn't that well known in the States.
Right.
I did that at Tübingen, and he was the great a theorist of utopia. He wrote The Spirit of Utopia, which is actually more concrete than it sounds, and his encyclopedic 3-volume Principle of Hope. And since the translation of these are horrible in English,
Are they?
I mean, unreadable, in fact. You liked it? Okay.
What can I say?
Yeah,
I didn't write the translation. I don't know enough about German,
Your sense of this is right. Bloch had a very expressionist style, even for his philosophy. And there's one thing that I can recommend from him, which isn't usually read, but is in English, and that's called Traces or Feelings. And these are these little stories that he wrote over the space of 7 years. They're just terrific. And some people consider it one of the great works of German literature.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's a fair estimate.
Hey,
so anyway, so I brought these. I like to think that these two strains play a certain role in what I think, and the ultimate goal is to connect rights and realism over principles and interests, as we're so proud of.
Well, this is really, I mean, this is fascinating because I was raised by the wolves in the revisionist U.S. Diplomatic history crowd.
Sure.
Williams and those guys. Yeah. So,
That's
all
what
right. So
happened. Really.
let me follow up David's question and your response with very general stuff, and then try to drill down into the most recent op-ed about what a negotiated peace would entail there. Okay. So I'm going to move from the way general to the very specific here. First, can you speak more about this, realism in Morgenthau's conspectus, what it has meant in
Sure.
terms of trying to piece together
Let me
some.
put.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me do that one first because
Okay.
that's a.
All right. Well, yeah,
I agree.
but the rest of them are going to be are okay. So there's that, which is really crucial to understanding, the causative
Yeah,
significance of the United States in the
quite
world.
right.
Yeah, because
The way
Kissinger.
I would put it is, yeah,
Good.
the way I would put it is this: it's not just Morgenthau or Richard Lowenthal, one of the really underrated thinkers in the field.
Right.
And it's basically you take the best of them, and it comes down to, in my opinion, it comes down to this. What you want to do is reduce ideological questions to empirical material questions. You want to get rid of the principles and talk about the interests. And the assumption is actually very simple. It's it's relatively easy to agree on interests. It's almost impossible to agree on principles.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, whatever you think of, whatever anyone thinks of Henry Kissinger, when he went to China, he wasn't talking about Maoism, right? He was talking about things, very material issues on which China and the United States could agree. And I think that's the realist part of this. The idealist part is the principles. Because if you just emphasize the objective material concerns, you wind up, weirdly enough, you wind up with a treaty that lacks legitimation on the part of the populace. And this happens all the time.
Right.
See what happened in the former Yugoslavia. That's a good example.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that's
Right.
across the board.
Well, this leads directly into the second question I wanted to ask you about this very thing is that you spoke of the ICDD, the what is it called, the International Council of Diplomacy and Dialogue that you
Yeah.
founded. We want to speak to the needs of civil society, and you earlier called it a civic diplomacy. Now,
Yeah.
So here's another general question for you: how do you see then the NGOs like what you have invented in this form in the making of foreign policy? Because it seems to me that is the trend, at least of the late 20th century, and it also seems then to allow for the dissolution of this realism versus idealism dichotomy that has regulated the historiography, at least of U.S. diplomacy. There's that. Is it? I mean, you're the high theorist among us here. It seems to me that emphasis on NGOs and trying to deal not just with state actors, but with people out there in civil society. I mean, the requirement for that is the dispersal of power from the state to society. That was the groundwork of Gramsci's theorizations.
That's exactly right. That's
Okay. All right. No, I mean, because it's always struck me that this moment, that dispersal of power makes moot all of these former notions that diplomacy is about one state actor dealing with another. And it also, it seems to me, it fortifies your idea about raising the question of blame becomes increasingly irrelevant here. We're not talking about the interests that can be defined in terms of a nation state's interests in the world. Right. Okay. So those are the general questions. And I think you've already dealt with them. So let me drill down into the latest thing. And this is really striking here. You say that negotiated peace would have to have common security guarantees. That makes perfect sense. Although you don't mention territorial acquisitions or relinquishments. So please address that. It would allow for EU entry, but not NATO, I take it. All right, that's second. And then the third is that we lift the sanctions, we meaning the alliance that Biden has put together. We lift the sanctions off Russia if Russia agrees to rebuild Ukraine. This is how I understand it. But in saying that, I think it's a remarkable move, because it seems to me what you're doing is reinstating the notion of reparations or compensation for loss of property that the capitalist nations insisted on when they addressed the Bolsheviks after 1917. We're not going to deal with you until you say you're going to compensate for the property you expropriated. And so now I think you've reversed that formula, and I think it's a brilliant move. But do you think is it possible?
Done. Yeah, this is quite so, Jim. I mean, in a certain way, that declaration, that's what you're, I think, hinting at, and it's right, is there's a lot of speculation. Yeah, I mean, if you asked for what's the mechanism for translating this, I'm not sure I would have one, to be perfectly honest. But I think part of the responsibility of people outside the state is to throw stuff out and put it on the table. And that's what we're trying to do there. With regards to the material interests, they're going to be shifting depending how the war turns out.
Right.
I mean, it'd be easy to say, give Crimea back to the Russians or approve the annexation. Or, for example, figure out there will have to be some kind of determination of what happens to Luhansk and Donetsk. But as you know, as David knows, there's basically a civil war within those little states. And we just don't know how that'll turn out. My bet is Russia will have to withdraw, in other words, to guarantee the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It'll have to withdraw from some of those areas it's annexed. There's a real question what would happen to these humanitarian corridors. And I don't know if they have to be kept or they don't. I think that's something that experts or people more experts than I are going to have to determine on both sides. But now comes the important issue that I think you raised. Namely, how can civil society or these NGOs have an impact on what occurs? Mm-hmm. And here I think there are two ways. There are, it's sort of common knowledge, which I guess can't always be trusted, but that negotiations are underway between back-channel negotiations are taking place between the United States and Russia. And
they are?
That's what I've been led to believe. But the stumbling block is that Ukraine doesn't want to participate, precisely because it's winning. I think it's that simple. This is the place where the critique of Ukraine comes in. Mm-hmm. It's repression of dissent. It's security forces. One of the largest in Europe, has 30,000 people.
Wow.
There, one can say, all right, that's where we begin the critique. Is it legitimate to engage in this stuff while the war is going on? The other point is the popular justice that's taking place in the areas that Ukraine has taken back from Russia. People are being, how can we say, unduly punished, to be kind. They're being unduly punished for being forced to work with the Russians. And we're talking about doctors, nurses, these kind of people, right?
Yeah.
And, that's simply unjust. Instead of worrying about who provoked whom and blaming it on Ukraine, make the critique concrete on issues that Ukraine can actually, or the state can actually do something about. Now, maybe, I said there are two ways that maybe civic diplomacy can help. One way is simply to raise issues. Maybe the state will pick up one or two. That's of the issues that are raised. Possible. The other way is to try and, which is more difficult, include civil society within the negotiation process itself.
Yeah.
In other words, change the locus of mediation. One of the ways that could happen is by bringing in outside organizations to help mediate. Whether that's possible in this instance, it's debatable. But in some instances, I think down the road, in terms of conflicts that are taking place, I can say with some certitude it is possible.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's very promising.
Yeah.
I think there's hope that's legitimate. Guarantees no, but at some level, we on the left are in some way in resistance. We have to have some hope that change is possible. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing anything, right? And this, what I really detest is this kind of cynicism that exists. Oh, well, nothing's going to be accomplished anyway.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is, that drives me crazy. That's the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and abandonment of responsibility that really weakens any notion of solidarity at all. So if that helps.
Yeah, definitely.
We were thinking about keeping this under an hour. And one of the topics that we all had agreed or wanted to discuss more about U.S. politics and the ascendant right and fascism as a general term. Would it be okay if we shifted gears to that before our entire day disappears? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, Jim knows probably more about this than I do. My sense is the following: that fascism is a term that exists on a spectrum. Yeah. It's not some fixed definition. There are things it needs, though. I think there are preconditions for it. One, it needs in German you call it a Gleichschaltung, which means a type of coordination of all facets of society behind the state and state policy.
Yeah.
In other words, I'll give you one simple example. In a truly totalitarian state, which is the end product of fascism, and this has happened all the time, or this has happened often enough. Someone who's Catholic goes into a confessional, confesses his or her sins to a priest, and the priest turns out to be an agent of the state and Zoom. Education, even public education, is infected by the state. So the children are turning in their parents. This was a common thing under both Hitler and Stalin. And so you're going to have this phenomenon, and you're going to have centralization behind the state of all media, and the suspension of meaningful elections, and all the stuff you would expect. You would have a cult of the personality that's going to be there. But more important than the cult of the personality, and I think this is what's missing in the present situation, two things. One, you're going to have a police state, straight up. The question is the pervasiveness of the secret police. That's the first thing, and the second thing would be, I think, the extent to which a kind of alternative to democracy is presented. This, to me, is probably the crucial element that is sort of unclear at the moment. Hitler or Stalin were very clear they were not interested in a republic. In Iran, it's clear, or it was clear, that Khomeini was interested in a theocracy or a theocratic republic, whatever that means. It's not clear to me what our present-day neo-fascists or our present-day fascists want as an alternative. This is true in Europe as well as in the States. Now, you can make an argument that this is precisely what defines neo-fascism. You know, that it's sort of just the creeping authoritarianism. Mm. But I think that in the last analysis becomes a weakness rather than a strength. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this, but that's my sense.
You know, I think we're disagreeing, Steve, but I'm not sure. Let me see if I can lay out what I think is, these rudiments or elements of fascism. But I want to stick to what I'm seeing unfolding right before our very eyes here in River City. I mean, I've had this argument. I've had this argument with a lot of the comrades, and what they want from me is evidence of a political formation, some sort of coherent, not movement so much as well, where's the militias? And and I say, well, okay, but to me, fascism, and neo or not, is a social psychology. And I'm with Klaus Tabeleit on this. That it's an attitude and a culture, and not just the political formation. In fact, that the cultural revolution
I would agree with that.
That creates the personality type comes long before the political formations, and I think we've already seen that happening. So the elements, as far as I can tell, then in this social psychology, and I'll leave it at that, is that first the dispersal of power from state to society, which lets people like Schmidt say, well, yeah, fascism is upon us, because the distinction, the liberal distinction between state and society is already collapsed. So we might as well collapse state and society, identify them, and that's also common, I think, to fascist movements. I think that's already taking place in the United States in this so-called Trumpist social milieu that they can't make a distinction because they're not yet thinking politically, and I don't think they ever will in political science or political theory terms. Okay, so the patriarchy and race are also, I think, crucial here. I'm absolutely crucial and these are animating principles of Trump's constituencies for sure. Now, but let me see if I can contradict myself and address what you say is what might be missing for the time being here, is that nobody seems to have sketched an alternative to Republican government or to democracy. But it seems to me that at least inchoately, these people already are. You've got people like Michael Anton, you've got the Claremont Institute already, working through all of these insane constitutional ideas. But at the same time, you've now got a Supreme Court majority which is willing to literally repudiate the Constitution in the name of the Federalist Society. The recent decisions in the Supreme Court and the impending decisions are not only willing to reinstate the most bizarre forms of patriarchy, and to abolish race in the name of what seems to be obviously racism. They want to go back to the Articles of Confederation. They literally want to go back to the Articles in the sense that they want to reinstate a diplomatic compact between sovereign states. And so in that sense, the articulation of this alternative is already on the table. And it comes in highfalutin words from the Claremont and from the Supreme Court. To me, it's like, wow, it's here. It's not, it is.
Oh, I'm totally with you that there's something here. Let me see if I can take up what you raised, which are crucial issues. On a lot of it, I disagree. I'm sorry, I agree. Some might disagree, right? That fascism connected with an authoritarian personality, as Theodore Adorno put it, that's absolutely right. That it predates the political, I think, is also right. In fact, Eric Fromm did a great study on the German working class in the 1920s, on the authoritarian structure of the family, which became a theme for the Frankfurt School. And he noted that was one of the principal reasons for the, shall we say, non-revolutionary attitude of German workers. So I'm totally with you on that. Also, let's take up the incoherence. That is exactly right. There never was, or basically, the more fascist a movement or a state becomes, the more incoherent its philosophy becomes. I think that's certainly true. And the best example is actually the official name of the Nazi Party, which was the German National Socialist Workers' Party. Right, so you have German for the conservatives. You have socialist for the socialists. You have workers for the communists. And here you are. And Hitler for everybody. Now, just moving over. There is one thing that I should have raised, which I guess I forgot. There's always been, for fascism, the idea of something new and a new man. Any kind of, in other words, it's whether it is objectively or not, it subjectively sees itself as a revolutionary movement. Yeah. And this is what's seen as separating itself from conservatives, mainstream conservatives. Now, it's absolutely right to suggest that every fascist movement needs establishmentarian conservatives to grease the wheels so that it can take power. I think that's, it was Eduardo, and it's not just Western. Eduardo Frei did that in Chile. Then Franz von Papen did it in Germany. Berlusconi did it in Italy. And of course, McConnell did it, and McConnell and Ryan did it here. So this is the conservative stream. What I don't see yet is an alternative that confronts the conservatives, confronts conservatism. You mentioned, I think correctly, that you desire to go back to the Articles of Confederation and the like. That I would see as conservative. In other words, you're trying to recreate the past in the present.
Okay.
And the other thing, I think that also holds for the rollback, for what I see as the rollback of rights. That is sort of unique through the courts and everything else. I think what we're seeing there is through an acceptance of democratic institutions, and this is the weird thing, we're going to roll back the rights and power of those institutions. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean about the Articles. Yeah.
And that's I'm completely with you on. Again, I'm not sure whether this is classic fascism. I'm also not sure whether it matters. What does matter, or whether this is neo-fascism. I think you're right. There's an attitudinal element here that is probably crucial, and I think there is organization. There clearly is, just as with Hitler, there's money behind it.
Yeah.
But in contrast to sort of maybe even your folks in Wisconsin, the question is, why should the Koch brothers fund these guys? Right? They have to, and this is the same thing as with Hitler and Mussolini. They have to first be in the position to warrant the investment. And that, I think, is, here we can learn something. These fascists have achieved the power they did through hard work and through working through the grassroots institutions. A lot of the people who I know who are radical populists, especially in the cities, right? You ask them, have you gone to a city council meeting lately? And like, no, I would never do that.
Right,
or town meeting, no, why? Because it's boring. I mean, everybody knows that. Right. Who's going to sit through this? I can't even go to my co-op board meetings without falling asleep. Yeah, and this is what I think the ultra-right has done very successfully. It's permeated, as you would say, the state, the civil society.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced you can't roll back the civil society moves without using the state. Okay. In other words, we've got to vote. We've got to stand for those principles that allow the unrepresented a voice, or the disenfranchised a voice, and we have to try and use the parties. I don't see any alternative.
I don't either.
Yeah.
David, you want to get in on this, don't you?
No, the example that I wrote down as a question, just in terms of contemporary, current events, is or relatively current, is 1/6 or January 6th, and kind of what that represented. I think you kind of touched on little parts of it. Is that right after it, one of the internet jokes that you guys know I like internet jokes. So there was a picture of Lenin, sitting at his computer, at his laptop, and he's smiling. It's that famous picture with his cat where he's like smiling, but they put a laptop in front of him. And the punchline is, this is what, happens when you don't have a plan, and you don't make demands, right? Because the Democratic Party seems very hepped up on this idea that this, and I think there's certain truth to it. They're out there, right? These people, I think they were representative of a group of people. I don't know how big that group is, but they certainly aren't. There isn't it, like you talked about, a coherence in a political agenda or strategy or whatever. They seem kind of disconnected.
Yeah.
But
it's organizationally disconnected.
Yeah, but they're there, and it wouldn't take much. It doesn't seem to me,
right,
to organize some kind of more dangerous far right movement.
Yeah,
but that also means for the left that there are inroads there, maybe not with those people, but that we have a response to the right. The left does, right? There are things that we can do to fight this off. One of the things I sort of poked at was the institutional argument. We do have numbers. The question is, how do you get them involved? And I think
it's sort of a mirror problem, right?
Yeah.
Both of us have trouble organizing the support we have. Yeah. I do think one thing that the kind of fractiousness within the Democrats, which we constantly try to justify as diversity, this is a serious problem. And the reason is because it creates a situation, I like to call it the moral economy, the separate deal. You see right now Latinos fighting African Americans on any number of issues.
Right.
I was together with the other day, actually, with 2 or 3 African American women, old students of mine. Actually, David probably knows them, and they said it was very interesting that the way abortion is being presented, the defense of abortion, could very well impact negatively on the Black community because of the tradition of forced sterilization and so on. That even more important is the day after pill. How should I say, removed myself from this discussion in a way. But maybe that's a mistake. Maybe we have to begin to talk about, seriously, the extent to which people outside the given identity formation can question those on the inside. Otherwise we're going to wind up with a world of ghettos, perhaps a little nicer than the ones that existed, but nonetheless. One of the things we have to do, I think, is reassert our commitment to cosmopolitanism and to basically Enlightenment principles.
Well, let me I think disagree, but by asking you 2 questions. I mean, first about how the neo-fascists confront the older conservatives. Seems to me that's already happened and is still happening with Trump's capture of the GOP, right?
You're right on that.
The older conservatives have, never Trump. Okay, that's one thing. And the other is that how to read the fault lines in the Democratic Party. And the way I would like to read them anyway, and the way I have is that the problem here is the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party has a death grip on the DNC, and therefore on how candidates get chosen. I mean, it seems to me that the overwhelming majority of Democrats are with Bernie. In fact, the majority of Republicans are with Bernie on the programmatic level. You know, most people want, you know, Medicare for all and so forth and so on.
Right.
And what is it? Where does the DNC stand on? Oh no, we can't have that. Oh dear.
You're certainly right.
Yeah. So that fractiousness, it seems to me, undergirds, but also overlays the kind of identity.
I should have pointed that out. That's right.
Yeah. So
But I do think this, building on your point, I think there's a way to. It's true what you say, but it doesn't speak to the fractiousness of the left. You're quite right about Schumer and these guys. I completely agree. But I think also there's a way to build on what you said, which is to begin to push more thoroughly a class line. I hate to sound old line Marxist on this, but I do think that. But we got to change it around. And so one of the things I like to think I developed was an idea, this was in Socialism Unbound already, of a class ideal. And the class ideal basically, I mean, it can go deeper into the response to traditional ideas of class from Marx and others. But basically, it comes down to this. I think we need to develop standpoints in which each identity group we can develop legislative proposals that speak to the working class elements in each without privileging any. That's the idea. And that requires, the only way you can really talk about this is to make it concrete in terms of the stuff you mentioned, national, single payer health insurance, and so on. I think that's going to be necessary. But I also think that it's sort of a change of attitude, as you would put it, is necessary to go with it.
Yeah.
We've got to create a situation in which, to put it simply, the other counts, not just for the establishment, but for us.
Yeah.
And I think what that means is changing the idea of identity.
Okay.
For example, as a Jew, right? As someone who's Jewish, I have nothing in common with the Hasids in Brooklyn. In fact, they probably hate me more than they hate a good Catholic like my wife, because I'm the traitor. You can't be what Isaac Deutscher called the non-Jewish Jew and empathize with the Hasids or have the same politics of the Hasidic communities at the same time. You got to make up your mind. And I think every identity formation, African American, Latino, gay, whatever it is, has these differences. For example, in the gay community, you have the tradition of the log cabin Republicans, and the great tradition of Baldwin and Jean Genet and so on. You can't have both. And I would suggest when people start thinking about their identity, they should not only think about how they feel, but what identity tradition would include the other.
Yeah.
Then we can talk about the class ideal. I think that goes hand in hand.
Okay, that makes
for what it's worth.
That makes perfect sense.
Just your quote, "The moral economy of the separate deal," is one of my favorites from. I remember that one.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the points though of recent, remember when and NARAL, ostensibly a healthcare organization, trashed Bernie, right, or would not support Bernie, right? I mean, that's like a classic example of where these fractious factions crush each other, right? And I don't know that they had to actually endorse Bernie Sanders, but the idea that, like, the one candidate who's talking about single payer healthcare and a healthcare organization, you would think might have similar lines, but we don't have that in that. We see too much of that, I think.
Yeah. The old-fashioned sectarianism. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, onward though, right?
Now that principle of hope, we got to maintain it. Yeah, that's right.
There you are. Bloch liked to say, being optimistic doesn't help. What we need is militant optimism. And I like that. Yeah.
With that,
you guys are the great example of that.
That's what we're trying to do.
There you go.
We shall see.
There you go.
Well,
Steve, thank you so much for coming. And
it's really my pleasure.
It really was fun.
Great seeing Jim. Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue to try this. So
yeah.
Else to
hey,
say?
Steve, are you in New York City?
Yeah.
Where at?
Well, I'm not in I'm in Fort Lee.
Okay.
Which is 5 minutes from New York City.
Yeah, yeah.
10 minutes.
Well, you're probably only 3 minutes from where I am. I'm up on 123rd. So you get off the George Washington Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Seconds. Yeah.
So, sounds good. I would love to get together.
Let's do it. All right.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah. We will talk.
Okay, good.
Okay. Well, this was the Politics and Letters podcast with Stephen Bronner as the guest today, and we'll be back.
All right.
Terrific. Thanks again.